Good evening. This is the January 16th, 2024, as opposed to the agenda that says 23, meeting of the Bristol Select Board or Planning Commission. And I'm not wearing that hat either, by the way. So anyway, so we'll call the meeting to order at 7:03. Is there any to review the agenda is the first item? I have nothing to change or add or delete. Is there any other comments or questions about the agenda? Okay, we'll move on. Public comment. Do we have any public comment? Doesn't look like it. We have no continuing business, new business. The select board held a couple hearings in December as was advertised. They considered public comment and they've made some changes to the bylaws. And so procedurally, there is a memo that is generated and describing what the changes are and how it impacts the town plan. So that memo has been revised and needs to go back to the select board, but I'd like to have everybody take a quick look at it and make sure that we are in understanding of what the changes to the memo are. So I've got one.
Is that the document you want?
Yes, highlighted. So this document here I sent out yesterday, I think, indicates the changes in yellow. So Chris is bringing it up on the screen.
There you
go. So obviously the date changed. I took that first sentence out. We weren't enclosing a proposed change in draft, so I took that out. The next highlighted area just describes and details the activity that the select board has undertaken, and they will be having another meeting that's been warned for January 22nd because the changes they made are major. And if you scroll down some more. So one of the articles that was added pretty much based on a request by Kevin Brown, who is the chair of the DRB, is to change some procedural things in the flood hazard regulations, which is Article 8. So we now have a discussion about Article 8. So that's was added there in the summary. In village mixed, in the dimensional standards, there was no maximum footprint size described by permitted uses. So the select board added 5,000 square feet for a primary and 1,000 square foot for accessory dwelling units, which accessory buildings, structures, sorry, which is, I think, what our intent was, and we talked all along that we were going to use HDR requirements in this zone. So it was an oversight on our part that we didn't catch that. They did. The next thing is an HDR. They changed the building height of an accessory structure to 25 feet or 80% of the principal structure. And they changed the maximum footprint of a structure that's used as an accessory building from 1,000 square feet to 900 square feet.
Kevin?
Yeah.
If I may ask, when you say footprint, so one could put an 1,800 square foot building, or are they talking about 900 square feet total?
It's the footprint on the ground. So it's your gross dimensions of the building on the ground, right?
Okay, so as long as the height is what it is, it could be more than 900. I don't know how that would work, but
So you could
okay.
have, so your point, I think what you're trying to say is you could have 2 stories and 900 square feet per story.
I guess if that would still do the 25-foot high thing, and
Yeah.
I'm not such a construction guy to know, you need a flat roof probably to do that, but I don't know.
Yeah, but yeah, it doesn't account for vertical, it's just horizontal.
Okay,
That was a change. And if we scroll down a little bit further, they changed in the ADU. We had to be 20% less. They changed it to shall have a height of up to 80% of the main single-family dwelling. And then article in item 2.3, sorry, is the addition of discussion about the flood hazard regulations. They basically, currently you go to DRB and then you go to the state level agencies for determination and you come back to DRB, or this after the fact?
It's after the fact and it's backwards. State statute
Sure.
requires that they're submitted at the time to the state at the time of submittal to the town. So our regulations were backwards.
So they've changed it so the submittals to the state level agencies goes first and then the DRB reviews afterwards. So it's mostly technical. In Article 4, business yard, they struck the language that had to do with trash activities in businesses with larger pieces of equipment. And I think that is the highlight of the items that they have changed that are incorporated into this memo. We'll take each one at a time, but I just wanted to overview this memo and get an understanding from the planning commission before we send it back to the select board. We do not have the capability to comment on this memo. It's just a mechanical thing that we send it back to the select board.
Or you can't offer up modifications?
We cannot officially. We can, and I've got it on the agenda for popping around the agenda a little bit to talk about if we want to make some comments or recommendations to the select board, but we do not have a spot to make comment as a planning commission within the statute.
I have a question.
Sure.
I can't remember what document it was. What did I see where there was a list of like 4 things that they wanted, I think, added or something, and one
Right.
of them was to a better description of the whatever, gosh, the yard.
Yeah, so there is a document that was sent out with the agenda that highlights in light blue all the changes that they're proposing to the actual reg. And then in the chair notes, there is a summary of the changes that they're going to make that when we get to that point, we'll probably just.
Yep, that's where I saw it. Okay, thanks.
So is anybody, based on, does anybody have any questions or comments about this memo, which is pretty much bureaucratic?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, hearing none?
Well,
Or,
I just have, so my only concern was that the primary structure issue, that they've limited the size. One of the things with village mixed is it's partially, if you look at conditional uses, are light industrial options. Nobody's building a 5,000 square foot building to do light industrial in. That's not big enough. So that should be segregated out in some manner. So,
okay, so we should talk about that when we get down to the details. I'm just trying to get some understanding of the letter here and understanding that this will be submitted to the select board as to the summaries of changes. And maybe we should have talked about everything else first instead of this memo first, but it's kind of bureaucratic. It reflects their changes, I believe, and we can revisit it after we get done talking about their changes. And then we I have an agenda item to provide feedback to the select board, but we do not have any influence other than just providing feedback to them at this point. So I will just go on. I'll leave this where it is. I don't hear a lot of commentary about the memo and what the memo has to do, or what we're required to do with the memo. And we'll go on to item B, which I think is where people have interest, to review the select board changes to the Unified Development Regulations. So they, in the packet, there is one that highlights yeah, I think it was that one, isn't it? Oops,
This one, I believe.
Oh, no, that's the
No.
warning.
Yeah, it's the, no, let me go back. Way to the top here. That's the agenda.
Bristol, that one, this is bylaw amendments to select board. I think that's it. No,
No, it's your letter.
no.
Hang on, I'll find it. Give me 2 seconds. Up to serve November. Unified Development Regulations, PC approved.
It should be item 4B, Bristol Unified Development Regulations.
PC approved 23. Is that
Yeah, PC approved 2023 select board adjustment.
gotcha?
Okay,
let me
so
get
if
back
we
to that.
scroll down through
Hang on, let's
this,
get back to sharing so these folks can see what
Yeah.
we're doing.
so,
Okay,
so she kept, or they kept all the table of contents in here, so that scroll down through that, and all the zone, they kept all the zone stuff, so we'll have to thumb through that stuff.
so this is,
So this is the village mixed.
all right, so this is the first, you want to go through these one at a time where you
Yeah.
see their changes?
Yeah. So at this point, I think we should have a detailed discussion. And then, so you were talking about,
So for Kevin, excuse me, for clarification, we are only allowed to provide feedback on their comments, not actual proposed changes or change any of this and send them back to it to go out. It's just comment. And is there even time for them to make any changes to that, or however this is going back is how it's going to end up getting?
so yeah, there's no, we won't be discussing any changes other than their specific changes tonight, which are what's left on the table. And then I don't know how it will come out if they have their hearing on the 22nd and we identify some things. And they choose to change that. Do they have to have another hearing?
If it's substantive,
If it's substantive, they would have to have another hearing.
So like this dimensional standards, I believe it was possibly intentionally, accidentally omitted, because it was not just on this rewrite, but if you go to the original UDR, the non-revised one, there are no dimensional standards for this zone.
yeah,
That's correct.
and there weren't any in the 2016 version either.
And
So,
there's the note right below that that says 8 about the commercial density and lot size, but there's nothing else. I think that was it for that, related to the difference between commercial and residential there.
so if I understand what Chris has brought up and you're concerned about is by adding these with the intention that these are residential minimums or maximums, we are compromising commercial buildings in that.
Yeah, I mean, light industry 1 is a building up to 10,000 square feet. That's the smallest light industrial we do. And that's a by right use with a site plan required. Light industrial 2 is up to 25,000 square feet, and light industrial 3 is 25 and above. And both of those are conditional uses. So the intent was to allow these kind of uses in this zone, but we just they just eliminated them by adding those two dimensional standards.
What'd you say, there's light?
Light industrial 1,
One,
2,
two,
and 3. 1 is up to 10,000 square feet. 2 is up to 25,000 square feet, and 3 is 25 or greater.
Would it be fair to say that this should be clarified to be residential only?
That's one option. I think it's either you add the residential stipulation to these standards or add commercial footprint restrictions as well. And then you still have to condition these as residential to, if you wanted to have those dimensional standards in there.
Well, and the other question is, I mean, I don't build multifamily housing, but one of the pushes that we have, or that you were aiming for here, was to increase housing. If you were to do a 4-unit, 2-bedroom unit housing, which is what you would be allowed on 1 acre, I mean, that's 5,000 square feet alone. So if you wanted to do multiple, like the fire station apartments would not be allowed with these restrictions. And everyone seems to think the firehouse apartments were a good decision.
And the firehouse departments were put in during village mix.
Yes,
And the reason they could do it before is because there was no restriction.
correct. So this was a
Yeah,
knee-jerk.
it was density only that restricted that project, not the building size.
And that was sort of the intent of this, which is why there was residential density and commercial density. When we wrote this back in 2016, those were this footprint / structure size was not included on purpose because it is such a hodgepodge of uses that you want to see in this area. So I'll get off my soapbox from here, but that's my input on this one particular change.
Which
Anybody-
zone is this, please? I can't see the zone.
Oh, it's village mix.
Mix, okay, thank you.
Which we chose to incorporate high density residential densities and setbacks to this zone.
Mm-hmm. I mean, wait, if you go back up and look at your uses, which is this piece here. Your public works facility would be allowed. 5,000 square feet isn't big enough for a public works utility. A healthcare clinic, you're teetering on the edge of big enough. A retirement community, that's tiny. Not for, if you're looking at the one on Mountain Street, that easily dwarfs 5,000 square feet. And that's not a very big community, a hotel. So all those things that were identified as correct uses for this zone were just removed by limiting the size.
Is it possible that maybe they meant this size restriction to go into a different place? Like
No,
ADUs or anything? I mean,
So
it doesn't make much sense.
I think what their discussion was, I followed a little bit of it, I didn't follow the whole thing. Their discussion was if you're going to increase the density like HDR, then, and they actually actually refer to R1 as to where this typical standard, but they were saying that if you look at high density residential, there's limitations on structure size and there aren't in this zone. And that's a problem. So,
At this point, all we can do is say we don't agree with their decision.
yep,
Is that my
we
understanding?
we can highlight our concern and send them a letter, and they can take it under advisement.
So just put in perspective, if you look at ROC, which is your residential office commercial, which is your, that's the one before it, I believe. Yeah, so this is your residential office commercial. This is basically West Street from Howden Hall to the high school. And you can have a 20,000 square foot building along West Street, but you can't right next door to it, right after it, or down on Hewitt Road or Lover's Lane, where you might be able to develop something of this size. So just something to noodle.
Go back to that.
I think we're all in agreement on your point, Chris. I think you make a good point.
Thank you.
Chris, this is Ian. I just joined, I was just putting the kids down, so sorry I'm late. Can you just give a quick recap of the size, what your concerns were, and maybe I can answer some questions?
Sure. The select board decided to add 1,000 and 5,000 square feet as a primary structure in village mix. But when you look at the uses that are allowed, light industrial alone is the first one that jumped at me. By definition, that's something that could be up to 10,000 square feet, and that's a by right use. Light industrial 2 is up to 25,000 square feet, and light industrial 3 is anything above. Group home, hotel, you can look at half of the things on here. The public works facility that the town wants to buy property for to build just got eliminated if this passes.
Well, that's not good. I think and it was my recommendation, I was essentially taking the current high density residential, the HDR, and applying those numbers to it. But obviously I didn't take into account what the uses are in village mix. So I'm happy to have you guys make a recommendation to change that. And the only reason we added that in is because, as you and I think it was you and I who actually talked about this when I talked to you, is that we noticed that there actually wasn't any footprint structure size in that particular area. But I hear what you're saying. I'm just looking at I want to look at the map just for that area. Where is it here?
Yeah, it's Bristol Works, Jackman's, that area, and then you've got basically from the fire station down over Stony Hill. You've got Hewitt Road, Lover's Lane.
Okay.
So planning commission, what do we want to formulate as to our concern here? Obviously, it sounds to me like we are eliminating a lot of uses. What makes sense to what would make sense to recommend for wording on this footprint structure? Go back to RLC, but even if we go back to RLC, that would limit certain types of.
What does this district currently speak to in this regard? Currently,
So it's undefined currently.
it's undefined. Well, there you have it. Has that been a problem? There's setbacks requirements, right? And lot depth requirements, and there are some residential lot size requirements. And there is commercial density and lot size and minimum 1 unit per acre. And then it has so maybe we just return to the current language.
So I think
I
this,
don't know, there could be quite a debate if you try to replace the 500 square feet number with 10 or 15, or, I don't know.
I think the concern from the select board, and Ian's here, you can chime in, I think they were concerned as we increase the density,
The residential density.
the residential density, that there could be some anomalies with the size of buildings, which you're saying, Fred, may or may not happen.
I don't know what you mean by that, anomalies to the building. They're currently on Hewitt Road or off Hewitt Road. You've got the apartment buildings down there. I don't have any clue off the top of my head whether they're 5,000 square feet or more, but there's a whole suite of apartment buildings down off Lovers Lane. And would they be eliminated from, if the current owner wanted to put in, he had the suitable land, they wanted to put in 2 more units, would that kill him or her?
I mean, if this is intended to be for residential, single-family units, maybe we recommend we just state it that way. And that would leave commercial, or it would leave other uses undefined.
Right, and if you're gonna do that, you could almost lower that 5,000 square foot principal number. One recommendation would be to lower that to you can even do like 3,000 square feet per dwelling unit. Or something along those lines, because that would be a single family home, couldn't be over 3,000 square feet. But if you wanted to do multi-unit apartments, it could get bigger and bigger as you needed to go, or whatever size you wanted to do,
But that wording is already in other areas, so you're changing. Any other opinions?
So I hear the concern of increasing the density and lowering the setbacks, having concern about building structure size, but the way I see it, the options are to run with residential standards and commercial standards, or revert back to no footprint restriction and just let the setbacks dictate that, which could be problematic as well. In the timeline, I think it would be a very complex discussion to try to craft something that may be appropriate balance between the two, because the two are really at odds, and I don't know that there is a balance between the two for further development of new commercial and also a residential sites that may model the HDR, because it's not the HDR. So we may be able to achieve the density, it would just look different.
But what I'm hearing you say is to identify the issue and suggest that they either identify a residential and commercial footprint structure size, or take it back out. Is everybody in agreement with that or okay with that?
Yes.
Yes, that's good.
I agree.
I mean, I think, speaking for the select board, I think we would want those recommendations from the planning commission. Obviously a choice that we made looking at this, trying to add this in, wasn't looked at as much as it should have been in terms of what is allowed in that area. So I think we look to you to make a recommendation to us on that. And I think a larger discussion perhaps is warranted, given that it's such a diverse mix of uses in those areas. And currently, structures in those areas are diverse as well, not just the uses that could be there, but what's there currently. You know, the school is in that district, as is the fire station, it looks like. So, you know, the wide range, and Stony Hill, right? That's all in there as well.
Yeah, David Blittersdorf's new warehouse, he just, or structure, he
Right.
just wouldn't work.
Right. And obviously the intent was not to restrict that.
I would be in favor in going to what the current language is, rather than we could have a discussion at the rest of this meeting to try to separate the two things out and come with some dimensions that might work, even if it was to cover what's there already. You know,
You wanna make a motion, Fred?
sure.
If we're gonna get.
I make a motion that we pass on to the select board that it's our recommendation that they return to the existing language in the mixed use district when it comes to, what would it be, dimensional size? What would be the appropriate thing?
Footprint, dimensional
Footprint.
standard.
Right. Which basically is nothing.
Do I hear a second? Rob seconds. Any discussion, further discussion?
I was just gonna bring up, please, we do have the lot coverage maximum as a moderator or a limiter to size of the building. Is that insufficient for this? Or no, I'm,
So if I understand what you're saying, if you got a half acre and you've got lot coverage of whatever it is, 50%, that's gonna limit you to a certain degree. Is that what you're saying, Slim?
yes, and then the commercial buildings would need a larger bit of land in order to build the size building they might want to put on it, and that would leave our densities maybe like we want them. I'm not sure, but
So
this maybe.
Yeah, because your lot coverages are almost backwards.
you mean,
Because if you're trying to promote residential density, you'd want to allow greater lot coverage. Let me back up your document. Even though it seems backwards. So you increase both your lot coverages to 50%. But if you want to make sure that you don't over commercially develop, is you would leave this back at 40, or you want it lower than, you want to promote housing. You increase that lot coverage, and you keep the commercial a little bit lower, and that gives you more green space around commercial buildings. But as is, it's pretty good.
okay. Any other discussion?
Do we know why there wasn't a footprint structure for this particular one? Was there ever in past Bristol regulations and it was taken out because of the very things that you're talking about tonight? Or was it just something that was, given that there are these dimensional standards in other districts?
Chris is doing some research.
Okay.
Old regs as we speak.
I don't believe they were in the regs before this either.
The current regs, current revision does not have them in there.
Right. And I think the 2017, I think that was the last time that this was.
Correct. The
That's-
initial release of the 2020 and 2017 did not have dimensional
Okay.
footprint standards.
And no, there was no footprint requirements in the mixed use district in the 06 regulations either.
06, that was it. Okay.
I would chime in by, I was on the select board when we passed zoning for the first time. And one of the guidelines that the then select board offered up in terms of the process was to keep things simple, to not add all kinds of hoops and stuff for people to go through, but what made common sense for your high density residential area, or when you're going outside of that, and this with mixed use, to give people some flexibility. I don't know, are there parking restrictions or are there parking rules, Chris, when it comes to this? Can someone use the
Yeah.
whole, 50% of the lot and not leave enough parking for the housing they have or for the workers they have? There are
No,
probably other things.
Yeah,
Right.
there are parking requirements, like for residential, you require one spot for every dwelling unit. And working, the commercial parking, it varies, it's about 3 spots for like, I could look it up, but yeah, there are
Oh, you
very,
didn't have to.
there are very clear parking requirements.
So I think this probably goes back to when zoning was established. I doubt if it has changed, and I think it was to give some flexibility with whatever setbacks we had talked about as providing whatever limitations there might be, plus parking stuff.
Okay, thanks, Fred.
Any other discussion? So all those in favor of taking the dimensional standards or building footprint sizes out of village mix, say aye. Raise your hand.
Aye.
I,
Aye.
Okay,
Any opposed? Any abstentions? So that's unanimous. We'll, what I'm thinking is I'll draft a letter and I'll send it out for everybody to look at and make sure that what I captured is what we really want to say, and then we'll submit it to the select board for their 22nd hearing. So if we can pull up
Oops, let me go back to that. Okay, so that's that one. We'll go to the next, what, do you know what the next change?
I think it's HDR.
There we go.
So the next change is an HDR where the building height was undefined for accessory. Building height is still 35 for principal. It's 25 feet or 80% of principal, whichever is higher for an accessory building. And then for footprint structure, and if this gets to be involved, we probably want to take each item separately, but footprint structure was reduced from 1,000 to 900 square feet for an accessory building. Any thoughts on that?
The writing doesn't make sense on this. So it says the principal is 25 feet.
No.
I-
So the 35 feet is for the principal,
Okay, so they're gonna keep 35 feet for principal, got it.
and then 25 feet for 80% of principal, whichever's higher
Got it.
for the accessory.
Space in there would help.
So Fred?
The question, you can have an accessory dwelling in this district, depending upon the circumstances. But they don't speak to that here. Does that mean that it goes to what it is now, or what?
So there's another section that regulates accessory dwelling units. So
Okay.
we're just talking about setback standards or dimensional standards, which a ADU needs to comply with as part of those requirements, but this is just dimensional standards for HCR right now.
Accessory, okay, perfect, thank you.
And Slim, you had a question?
yes, I'm just wondering if we all agree that when we voted on this, we thought that a 900 square foot, ADU could be 2 stories and be actually an 1,800 square foot house with 25-foot roof line? Or did we think it only had to be a 900 square foot total building. Living space.
So an ADU is limited to 900 square feet of livable habitable space. But you can have any combination of spaces that fit the zone that you want to put an ADU in. To put an ADU in part of a building or a whole building.
Right, so one of the best ways to think about the two is they both are accessory is in the title. They're two very different things. An accessory building is the box, not what goes on in it, it's the box. So whether it's a garage, whether it's a stable, whether it's a Livingston shed, kids play structure, that's the box. The accessory dwelling unit is a use. It's what can be done inside of the box. It's no different than if you wanted to have a catering facility inside of that box. You have there's two separate pieces. You could build a garage, two-story garage with a open rafter setup upstairs. A year later, build an accessory dwelling unit by utilizing 900 square feet of that structure. All the remaining space, that could be 2,000 square feet down below or all around it. That's just empty space that's being utilized for, as an accessory building, it's other things that the house would do. Park a car, store your kayak, things like that. So it's separating the two, that an ADU isn't always the physical structure, because you can convert part of an existing building into an ADU.
Okay,
Without-
I got it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're making sense, but what are the restrictions on the accessory building, let's say the garage underneath the ADU, that will be easy enough for you to enforce that it does not become part of the living unit? Can they have a sink down there? Can they have a toilet in their garage? Can they have a what, or not?
If in order to have if it was the only toilet facility in the structure, no, that would be then counted as square footage towards the ADU. If the ADU is a fully functional living space, which is what it needs to be, which is with the toilets, facilities, a cook facility, those kind of things, it's a space to live in that can be inhabited just like any other home. Then if you wanted to, in your current garage, you can put a toilet. Matter of fact, it's a very easy process to get the wastewater permit to do that. But that wouldn't necessarily be part of that living space. That would be part of the accessory space if you wanted. If that makes sense,
Well, I hear what you're saying, but I'm just saying it seems to pose a problem potentially down the years with enforcement.
ADUs are creating all sorts of fun with that. I just haven't.
So, yeah, the discussion we're having right now is the size of an accessory building within HDR. And what happens whenever in a building Y in the future, I think we're getting off track here a little bit.
Okay, you're right, and thank you for your giving me information about the 900 square feet.
Brad?
Another question, and I'm digging into my memory, but this isn't about a dwelling, but an accessory building. And I think the setbacks for accessory buildings were quite a little bit different than for an accessory dwelling. From reading the descriptions and our zoning rules and regs, where we have an accessory building as a situation. I don't remember the numbers, but I know they were different than what the setbacks were for an accessory dwelling. And I don't see any addressing of that. And maybe there shouldn't be, because those numbers are right, but I'm curious.
So my understanding is within the Enabling Act for an accessory dwelling unit, you go back and look at the dimensional standards in the district where you're proposing to put the ADU. So in this case, you'd be looking at HDR, and you'd be looking at all the dimensional standards here for that ADU to comply with.
Is
If you're muted, Fred.
Fred, you muted yourself.
there you go.
Oh, there you
I
go.
said, is what I'm looking at just an accessory dwelling guidelines, or is it also for an accessory building?
It's an accessory building. This is talking about buildings, not
Okay,
ADU.
well, I'd ask Chris to just check with an accessory building what the setbacks are.
10 feet,
Side yard, rear yard, and all that jazz.
10 feet.
For an accessory building,
Yes.
okay.
In that zone, it varies from zone to zone. In HDR, it's 10 feet. Matter of fact, you all didn't change that when you, which is this highlighted section here, when you reviewed those dimensional standards.
Any other comments, questions about these proposed changes by the select board?
Was this the only one that was changed to 900?
Yes.
Okay.
And I believe the rationale was within HDR with the higher density, it's reasonable to use that as that square footage as a restriction.
Correct. It was matching the accessory dwelling use square footage size that you'd set at 900, which matches the states. So if you were just building an accessory dwelling unit structure that was only going to be an accessory dwelling unit, would be 900 square feet. So those would match. We felt because of this particular district and its smaller lot sizes, higher density of buildings, that it reduces the overall structure of a single story or a two-story building, keep it sort of in the same nature as the buildings around it, even though obviously in this district we have a large mix of buildings. And then the building height was in response to comments that we received at multiple hearings, and it was to do with one of the things people had pointed out was that if you had a single story building, you were limited to that 80%, where it was actually written by you guys as 20%. It was the opposite way, but saying the same thing. And so we felt that we perhaps shouldn't limit people who own a single story house to be able to build a structure that perhaps had 2 stories. And there are a mix of those already in that district.
So I'm not really hearing anybody suggesting we change this. If nobody is of that mindset, we should move along.
May I make a comment?
We took public comment at the beginning, Tom, and we'll take it at the end. We are allowing Ian to talk in the capacity of the select board and explain the select board thought processes. Ordinarily, it would be just a planning commission deliberation.
How about your side?
Okay, let's move on.
So, it'll be a while if we hit something else, I believe.
Yeah, this is all standards, so I don't think there's any more standards that were changed. Well,
Yeah, this is
so here's everybody's favorite is ADUs. So if we go down, the select board changed the wordsmith essentially. New construction shall have a height of up to 80% of the main structure as opposed to at least 20% less. Any comments, concerns,
Question.
questions about that?
So with the language in the HDR of 25 feet or 80%, whichever is higher, if it's a mixed use accessory dwelling unit in that area and it's a single story existing home, they would not be able to put a garage potentially with a apartment above it because it would be more than 80% of the main structure. Is that correct?
I think that's the way I read it. There's no minimum height delineated for an accessory building in this section.
I just wanted to make clear that the accessory building would be okay. But if it was mixed use permitting wise at the same time, the structure would not be okay if it was ADU and garage, but a garage of up to 25 feet, if it's more than 80% of the existing single story home, would be okay. Okay. Nope, just
Well-
clarification, that's all.
No,
okay.
so one of the things that I talked about with Val as we were making these updates was that this is you're defining the use here versus the structure. And so we were going to put both, we were going to match what's in the use and match it in, or for the structure, sorry, the district, and then match what was here. But we ended up not doing that because we felt it conflicted with each other, that you wouldn't need one and then the other. You would I'm trying to figure out a way to say this, and I might have to reference my email to Val. She picked up that one conflicted with the other, but I know what you're saying, Rob, in terms of I had it in my mind that why it was this way, and now I've forgotten it, but I'll have to look at my email. I guess what we're looking at is that, to me, you would look at this and then you're referencing the use and the standards within the use versus this particular section. Is that correct, Chris? Is that the right way of looking at it, or is it the opposite way, or are you looking at it at both the same time?
It depends on the application. There's 3 different ways an ADU can be created. And this is where everything gets gray. And it's in trying to write this specific of language is detrimental. If you have an existing garage sitting right on the border that was built 50 years ago for zoning, you want to put an ADU in it, have at it. As long as you don't increase the footprint, don't encroach on the neighbors anymore, and don't exceed the height standards. Because that's not new construction. That's converting old building. And what is new construction? You don't define that either. I could build my garage right now, and then in April, when the garage is done, a month later, come in May, and apply for my ADU in a pre-existing structure. I know it's an end around, but I'm just telling you what loopholes are in this verbiage. So it's this constraint, I feel, is redundant and unnecessary. You already address accessory buildings at 80% of the height of a primary structure.
We don't do that in every zone.
You're right. So, and again,
So
all it says is new construction. So there's wiggle room here now, and I hate wiggle room. It opens up way too many opportunities. I mean, you've got, yeah.
So Chris, is what you're saying that you would remove D, but in the use section, we'd still have those restrictions. And so you'd still know what your limitations were or what you could build to. If you're in that area and you have space on a lot and you have the setbacks and your house is a certain height, you can do up to 80% of the height of your house or 25 feet maximum. And you don't necessarily need item D here to reinforce that.
Yeah.
So with an ADU, you need to go back and look at the dimensional standards in each, whatever the district is you're applying for. So this was sort of brought about to try to understand what would be lesser impact, or we have it clearly subordinate. I can never remember that term. And it so it's supposedly to demonstrate it's clearly supported, that it's smaller set, it's not as tall, it's set back, that sort of thing. The problem is that when you go back to the enforcement is you look at dimensional standards. And this may or may not restrict those dimensional standards.
So is our recommendation that we just strike D altogether? We'd like them to strike D altogether? Lost them.
Okay, we're back. So I just lost power on my laptop. So we lost the last few minutes. Can you guys hear us still?
I can now.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was a little bit of moment of panic. Not gonna lie, my laptop shut down.
So I was saying, are we thinking, are we mostly in agreement or most about the idea that striking D completely is the best course
I
for
would,
this section?
I would caution that we started out saying that we are not going to rewrite the regulations. We were going to comment on the select board's changes. And if we start talking about taking this item out, we are all of a sudden modifying the regs as opposed to commenting on the select board's commentary. It's a fine line, but
Yeah, I mean, if that's the case, I'd just leave it as it is then and let the chips fall.
So I may have added some confusion and more discussion to this, but I just was trying to clarify because ADUs are such a big topic recently, and the HDR being kind of the heart of the village, at least the residential development, everybody's a little more sensitive to that appropriately. And so any changes to that, you have to remember are within that district, and that this sort of requirement of height would apply to all those other districts, and those other districts do not have accessory structure dimensional height standards different than primary structure at the moment. So
yeah, I think you're right, Rob, that the comment that the select board heard and we heard ourselves about limiting the height, particularly in one-story situations, this hasn't solved that issue.
So Kevin, say that again. In terms of D doesn't solve the issue, or in the district use, that language doesn't solve the issue.
This doesn't solve the issue because you go back to the single story. I think it was, if this was contested, it wouldn't hold water, personally. But if you look at this and read it at face value, you go back to the single story example that everybody was concerned about when they brought it to our attention as well as the select board attention. This doesn't solve that problem.
Correct.
the
But-
argument would be the use itself is less than 80% of the main structure, right? Because it's just the upper floor.
So I hate to say it, but unless we want to get into revising the regs, which I would recommend against, you
Yeah.
just say, yep, okay, and move on.
Yeah, I unfortunately agree. I don't like the verbiage, but I think they cleaned up the language. The way their recommendation up to 80% is better, is easier to read and easier to understand. But the whole line is troublesome. But
Does anybody have strong opinions otherwise?
stop shooting so you can see people.
No.
Okay.
Is
let's
your
move-
concern of, sorry, Kevin, is your concern about revising this because of the timeline or just because is that your concern? Because the select board is not concerned about that. We don't necessarily need to hit town meeting to have these regulations voted on. There'll be a voting in August as well as November of this year as well.
I was just trying to keep things clean. If we start taking a wider scope, then where do we stop type thing, but.
Yeah. No, I hear that.
Maybe we just, and, I mean, I gotta hear a conversation here, but maybe we do take and discuss, what is it, item D? A little bit wider, understanding that it doesn't solve the problem that we've heard and what the select board's heard.
Oops, Slim, you're muted.
Can you state that for me, please, your problem? Just so I hear it again.
So when, are you talking to me?
Yeah, or,
Okay.
Yep.
I just don't want to ramble on endlessly, but when we went through our process and when the select board went through their process, we put that 80% in there trying to restrict height. So it's less impactful than the main structure, but a single family structure was identified numerous times that you can't do much if you're gonna have 80% of a single story structure with anything. So the attempt was to somehow set up a minimum dimension or something like that that would allow at least some flexible height, but it didn't really get pulled off the way that we set up item D and the way it was modified. Is that clear? I don't think it is.
that's okay. I remember.
Verbiage
It
back.
seems to me that you could remove D and solely refer to the dimensional structure in the use section.
Mhm.
And so if someone came to Chris or the zoning administrator and wanted to build a two-story building, the dimensional structure information would be in that use table. And that's what would drive this. And when you look at this section 404, you would be driven by, or your standards would be the 900 square feet of accessibility or for the accessory use of that two-story building that you wanted to build. And that two-story building in HDR would either be 80% of your principal structure or 25 feet. And I think we wanted it, 25 seemed like a good number. I think Chris and I spoke about that.
Yep.
And then obviously by adding in the 80%, that covers larger houses, and the 25 allows single-story homes to be able to have a structure. But I don't feel that we want to put too many restrictions on this. Yes, we want to keep it down if we can, but I feel that I don't want to be too restricting on people and what they can do. So this was trying to be as open as possible.
I mean, C is
Is
just
there-
as bad.
C pretty much goes to aligns with a lot of the setbacks in zone dimensional standards, doesn't it?
But not in HDR, it doesn't. Again, you're conflicting with your dimensional stand. I mean, I don't want to tear this apart. It's just one of those that as they had that discussion, it triggered my brain.
We with that setback comment, Chris, you're correct. I was looking at that, and actually all the accessory building setbacks are less than the principal structure setbacks across all the districts. If they are different, they're always less, because you would think, oh, it's okay to have a shed closer to me than a house, so it's less impactful.
But this has to do with the front property line.
Mm-mm. Oh, just from the front property.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is what it is in HDR.
Yeah.
Front yard setback measured from road center line, 20 feet behind principal front line accessory. So
Yeah.
so C does match.
For there, your other zones, it doesn't. Like, 'cause I don't think we do
Oh,
that.
right, right. I mean, I know, Chris, you said that you don't wish to have this discussion, but it's things that you're seeing. I think it's good to have the discussion, not that I want to make the planning commission spend another 2 years on this, but I think you have an opportunity to really clean it up. I mean, if you don't, I guess you'll just see if there are problems arise, and then when the next revision comes, you hopefully clean up and alter it then.
So if do I hear anybody willing to make some sort of a,
Just reading through your existing if you added in C, if you added in the village planning area, new construction shall be set back, it almost matches all of your zoning
in C?
in C. Just trying to give you,
Say that again?
if in C, if you start out new construction in the village planning area shall be set back from the property front line. It matches because you have it in village in VR. I'm just going through these real quick. And I was like, wait a minute, you have this in some of them already. Because in heck, you have it in C1, you have it in HDR, village residential. Dot village mix. I saw it in there. For some reason in my head that sticks, but I could be wrong.
We have the 20 feet.
Yeah. Front line is 20 feet behind primary structures in village residential, high density residential, commercial. Not in village mix, but that's okay.
ROC is only a 10-foot difference.
Yeah, so it's just, I think it could clean that up a little bit. Because that's the intent of what you're trying to do. You're trying to protect your village area with this. Because in all honesty, on Meehan Road, out in a 5-acre lot, is this a big deal?
No, and we felt the same way. You have a lot more space out there.
So let's back up a little bit
Sorry.
and talk about D. Does anybody have an appetite to make a motion to make any changes to D? Including delete it?
Shannon, you're muted.
Sorry. So we talked about that 80% or 25 feet. Was that something anybody else would consider adding? Because they've got the 80% or 25 feet, so we can add that ADU to a single story home. If it's, say, upstairs with a garage, that's it, in an accessory dwelling. Not dwelling, accessory unit, meaning top floor of the garage.
Right.
That's the only recommendation I had there, was that comes back to limiting the people with the single story home, which isn't many, but
So I think you end up in conflict with other zones that do not limit the height of an accessory dwelling unit or structure. So I think most other zones are not defined, right?
Correct.
It's just a building structure height of 35. That's it.
35 feet.
Yeah.
Whether it be principal or accessory.
Yep.
You keep in mind, we had some pretty heated debates about how to make sure an ADU is not more predominant in the landscape, and that's what a lot of this came about with. So there was, but that doesn't mean that it's good regulation. I guess.
Right, and if you wanted to make sure that you covered some of your other, I mean, later on in your next revision, go through and look at all of your zones again, see if this works in your dimensional standard in your HDR, if it's working and it's achieving what you're trying to achieve and not stopping what you don't want to stop. Then maybe look at implementing it in your village mix and or your village residential and or your ROC, because that's still part of your village area that you're trying to. It's sort of this one would be a good test. Instead of hitting everything with a huge hammer and hoping you do it right, you fix one piece of it, see what the outcomes are. And then if it's not restrictive enough, add some more restrictions. If it's too restrictive, remove that restriction. So
You're talking about the dimensional standards within the district, not within
the
their
use,
404 where it says this, and this.
that's my recommendation as just from the outside.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Would it be possible to leave it as is, even with the change there the select board wanted? Is it possible to have an exception within the regulations, within the zoning, like for a single story home? Because someone may come in some situation, tear down an existing house that is 2-story, but they only want to build a single story. And then they might want a garage, and then if they put something on top, it takes it the same or higher than the house they just built. So, or even, same for existing single story. Like you said, there aren't many, but that can certainly change. So is it possible to leave it like this and then say that for single story homes or a principal building, that the accessory building can be higher or the same height? Is that possible to put in regulations like that?
You can do it, but you got therefore I before E except after C. I think what the problem here is we are trying to regulate building dimensional standards within a use.
Mm-hmm.
And
And we're also looking at the definition of clearly subordinate, which to allow something to be larger than the primary is not clearly subordinate. So that's problematic in and of itself.
Well, that would be part of the exception that I was talking about, that it, to make it so that it doesn't have to be subordinate. It can't be higher than the main, maybe that it can't be higher than the main structure, but it can be the same height. I don't know, of a single story principal. Is that just too much?
so we're kind of going around in circles. Do we want to change item D or make a recommendation to change item D, or do we want to move along?
It doesn't really change anything. If you mean change it or
Change
agree
it.
with or what the select board wants in the wording.
Change could be we rewrite the sentence. Change could mean we take the sentence out.
Okay.
Nothing, so.
Well, I'll make a motion if I may.
Mhm.
I'll make a motion that we delete item D.
I'll
Can you
second
put it back up?
Oh, yes, sir.
I don't hear any seconds, so I guess we'll move on.
No, I seconded it.
Oh, Fred,
Yeah.
you seconded it? Is there any discussion?
Yes, please.
Go ahead, Tim.
So what is the controlling language then for the high density residential as far as accessory buildings? That would control this if
The
this is taken
controlling
out?
language,
You
the
go back up to it.
controlling language is, yeah, go back up to it, would be 80% or 25 feet or and 900 square footprint.
I'm trying to find, sorry if I'm making you guys nauseous. I'm just trying to get there fast.
I'm sorry.
There you go.
There you go. It's that language right there on building height, Slim, under HDR.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion, comments, questions?
Yeah, I would say you, by removing this, you're not losing that control. It's still in the use this table. And by removing this, it doesn't make any changes to the HDR, but it does help areas that are outside HDR, larger areas with larger lot sizes. It doesn't limit accessory dwelling unit size, which I think is a good thing. So by removing it, it helps.
It will allow a single-story house to build an ADU actually maybe taller than it is, and that'd be okay.
Correct. Or
Yeah.
a two-story house to build 80%.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Good.
Any other discussion? All those in favor of striking item D, say aye, raise your hand.
Aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? Passes. And then, so the next one is, we go back and item C. New construction shall be set back from the front property line at least 20 feet greater than the main single-family dwelling. There was some discussion that that should be limited to HDR only,
No, to the village planning area.
to the village planning.
Yeah, which encompasses a couple zones that already have this limitation.
Did we talk about the village planning area and zoning? We do.
Yeah.
Okay. So if there is some interest in discussing that or making a motion,
I can make a motion on that, and that would be to add under C, new construction in the village planning area shall be set back from the front property line at least 20 feet greater than the main single-family dwelling.
is there a second? Fred seconds. Bill seconds, well, it wasn't quite quick enough. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of adding in the village planning, oh, sorry. Fred, do you have a question? We're
Oops.
voting.
You're muted.
I was voting in an effort to move it along.
Okay, good. All those in favor, raise your hand or say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? Okay, so we're modifying item C. We are on a roll.
Let's knock it out. Let's get back to.
So I think, well, we got one more big one here.
Are we all the way down to
I
definitions?
think so.
Oops.
Whoops, back up.
Is this?
Oh, so the.
This is flood hazard.
So yeah, let's back up a little bit. Well, okay, yes. So we talked about this briefly. Anybody wants to dwell on it, we can. Otherwise, we can move along, but it just changes the sequence of events between state review and DRB review.
Yeah, and it brings it into alignment with the state statutes.
Anybody have any desire to dwell on that? Okay.
And this is still flood hazard. I was just making sure.
Okay, business yard. So the additional verbiage that we had put in discussing trash and garbage businesses, as well as limiting larger equipment yards, has been struck. Has been struck. Is there any comments, questions about that?
Stop sharing. Oops.
Look slim.
We spent some time on this and I thought we agreed that some of these uses were inappropriate. Now, I think our language is poor, maybe a little difficult, but I think the idea is correct still. And I seem to remember then when one of these came up before with potentially a garbage business being involved, that applicant was told that a garbage business would not be allowable. So I would like to be able to have some language in there that would continue that idea that some of these businesses are a little much and too noisy for, let's say, the mixed district. For
So-
example.
Is this what I was asking about, in that they want to strike this, but they want us to define business yard instead of saying what it's not?
So I think with specifically with the trash and recycling garbage business, there was a commentary from Kevin Brown that we do not allow those activities anywhere else in town. When you start putting them in your regulations as prohibited, then it's kind of like, well, where do you allow it? So it's kind of one of those things, don't ask, don't tell. That's, I'm probably not being politically correct with that, but. And then the business yard one, the select board struck that, I believe, it's still on here. They felt it was too restrictive to restrict those types of equipment to paved roads.
Okay.
Want to see everyone's reaction.
Yeah. So there's a little concern I've heard. Is there any other concern? Does anybody want to identify a motion or discussion point to develop here?
So I'm sorry, but where was it that they were asking us to define business yard? In this section, or? Because I know one of the directives was that's what we needed to do, was define business yard.
So within our deliberations, we had a lot of discussion about what constitutes a business yard. And Anna and Adam went back and revised the definition to some degree. And then I think through discussion, we also added the large equipment clause about restricting it to paved roads. So we as a planning commission deliberated on what we kind of ended up working out as some, what we considered some acceptable limitations, definitions, I guess you could say. Does that make sense, Melissa?
Yes, but I'm just wondering what the select board wants us
So,
to do,
well, Ian, why don't you?
besides taking that out.
That was it. We just removed that. We didn't ask for a definition of a business yard. Our concern, as Kevin said, with highlighting a particular use was that it doesn't match what the actual uses are defined by the districts. There is already mention in there, or not mentioned in there, of trash businesses, and yet you're highlighting trash businesses in a definition. And we thought that it didn't need to happen because the uses aren't there anyway. And
Okay.
then, as Kevin said, with the size and the vehicles, we felt that it was too restrictive, given that we have more unpaved roads than we do paved roads in Bristol. RA5, which is a business yard use, is a very large district, one of the largest districts, and we felt that it would be limiting for businesses to be able to start the business yard by having that last sentence in there restricting certain sizes of trucks. And I know it's a contentious issue, and we've had those discussions at the hearings at the select board, as well as I know you folks have had it here as well. But I will say, as I said before, business yard can be many things. I think there's one idea of a business yard that folks might have that discussions have been about, but there are many other ways of doing a business yard. And by limiting the truck size, you limit everything versus just a particular type.
Thanks.
So given that, is there any commentary, further discussion about the definition changes for business yard? I guess we'll move on.
Kevin, the change above that on page, if you go one page up to 25 at the top of that page and removing the sections of 810 of section 810,
Oops, there we go. I'm sorry.
was that from select board or DRB, or how did that come about?
So that was by the select board's action based on the recommendation of the DRB.
Okay, sorry, that just wasn't, I didn't follow that with everything else.
Yeah, also,
Kevin,
go ahead.
I was going to say, Kevin Brown presented that to us when we had our deliberation and made those recommendations. It was something that had been picked up where it seemed like things had been reversed and not the way that you would actually do it. And so he wanted to correct that.
Yeah, and it actually came to light. We had a permit come in, and through the process, we realized it was backwards. So.
Okay, perfect.
In?
That's it, I think.
So
So-
in definition in, right? Did you change that? Oh wait, that's not in here.
That's it. Which one?
The in, oh, but the select
didn't
board didn't,
change-
the
they
select board didn't
didn't
touch
change
that. Okay, perfect.
So to summarize, I believe what we did here is in village mixed, we decided to recommend taking out the building footprint requirements that were added. We recommend striking item D in the ADU section. And we recommend adding in VPA to limit the setback in item C. Is that a fair summary of what everybody believes we did?
Yes,
Okay, so
Yeah.
I will draft that up and I'll send it out to you guys in the next few days for review then.
Will we review and reply to you, or is this for the next meeting?
No, reply to me because we need to
Okay.
have that set up so that the select board will have it for their meeting of the 22nd, and we won't be meeting before then, so. Is that okay with everybody?
Yep.
I don't believe unless I say the wrong thing, it's gonna be too involved. So the next thing is action to provide feedback to the select board on their proposed changes to the UDR. I guess at this point, the action would be to authorize the chair to draft a letter to present to the select board. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Do we need a formal action? No, okay. That takes care of that. The next item is an action as well. The town is developing a hazard mitigation plan update steering committee to go through the mitigation plan. And they've asked for a rep from the planning commission to be part of that. So we can have an election with multiple people interested in that. But all we need is one volunteer, really.
Or you're drawing straws.
Or we trying to.
And when do these people meet?
Um,
Not at 7 o'clock at night would be nice.
it's a
I'm
good
not an
question.
evening person.
Let me see, where is that? In the. Somewhere, there is a memo from Valerie.
Yeah. Looking forward, I invited, no, it's energy gathering, damn, I got it.
There it is. It is called item 4C, select PC rep.
Yeah,
So here is what
Oops.
Valerie is
Hang
asking
on, I gotta-
for. I don't know if she delineated.
Don't believe they had a time frame.
I think it's still to be determined. And I think it's, again, when we have everyone who we need for this particular committee commission, we would work to have a amicable time that everyone can meet. Because it's obviously a very wide mix of people.
That was a very wide mix of people.
Is there any interest to volunteer?
We're drawing straws. Shannon, you're gonna do it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll do it.
Will you
Okay,
do it, Shannon? Thank you.
I will do it, as long as they have the hybrid meetings and it doesn't interfere with horse showing.
no, they definitely,
For sure.
Hey, I got priorities.
no, thank you very much.
Yeah, so somebody will put me on their mailing list and let me know when
I-
things are gonna happen, or
Yeah, I will forward your information to Valerie, and I assume she will start organizing a meeting at some point. I think we're kind of late to the game here. So I wouldn't expect it to be too far in the future that she starts organizing, but
They're deep in the budget at the moment, so I
No,
think it's pretty low on her priority for the next month, don't you, Ian?
Yes, and it's not a huge commitment. It's only a few meetings, if that, potentially a year.
okay.
okay, well, thank you. Take care of that one.
Just quickly I guess it's kind of administrative matters, but while Ian's still here, on the website, under the planning commission section, under zoning, it still has a link to the 2017 zoning regs, but not the 2020 in there. But if you go to documents and under planning and zoning, it has the current ones there. Can we get that maybe updated so that it's listed in both places so it's a little clearer, or is that intentional?
Nope, I like mass confusion.
I would recommend it's in one place, not two. So if it's in the department, the planning commission should either not talk about it or point to the department.
That was gonna be my recommendation. Remove the link to the document and just point them to the section where they're all listed. Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, I thought I was pulling up current ones until I saw the cover page, and I was like, oh, I'm not in the right place.
So the next item, we're moving into administrative matters now. We have minutes from November 7th and the 21st, 2023 to review, and the word's not approved, but
Accept.
accept and make any changes as necessary. I did notice, I think it was on November 21st meeting, there is a question about,
We have to do one at a time. And
Okay.
I went to seventh because that's chronological.
okay. I'll back up. So on the seventh, is there any, would anybody like to move that we accept the minutes of November 7th?
Wasn't I there for that one? Say I'm there.
Shannon was there.
Oh yeah, okay. I thought one of them I saw that wasn't listed, but it was probably months ago.
Somebody willing to, ooh, there's the one, that's Dave Sharp, that is highlighted there.
Yep,
That's on the 14th, right, the 21st,
seventh.
Yes.
the 7th? Okay, so we need to change the highlighted Donald question, Dave question to Dave Sharp. That was a minute.
It could be on both. I think he was at both.
So I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of November 7th with the corrected name of the visitor, as noted, and
I'll second it.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye,
Aye.
or raise your hand.
Oops, sorry.
I abstain.
Okay.
I wasn't there.
Any noes? And one abstention. Okay, we'll move on to the meeting notices for the meeting minutes for the 21st.
Share. Almost there. Share. Okay.
Take a minute to peruse these.
Thank you. It's just the right pace.
Anybody, willing to make a motion to accept?
I'll make a motion to accept.
Your second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving, accepting the November 21st minutes, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Any abstentions?
Fred.
One abstention, okay. As a matter of detail, we do not have, we are in the process of generating minutes for the second meeting, I can't remember the date of October, which we didn't have them done yet. Shouldn't say that too loud. But anyway, hopefully we'll have those next month. On to the next thing is discussions, the zoning administrators report.
Nothing real pressing lately. We've got a couple subdivisions going on in town. One of them got approved the other night by the DRB, the other got preliminary approval, and we'll be seeing final approval hearing in a month. The first one was a 4-lot subdivision, north 116 up by the log cabins. And there's a 7-lot subdivision on Plank Road, just before J Drive in the cornfield right there. So those are the two biggies.
Thank you. So for miscellaneous correspondence, I think it's all stuff that you can, if you haven't, you can digest at your own pace. And unless anybody's got any questions or comments or anything they want to bring up for what's presented or what's documented or how we want to say it. Okay, so we'll move on to public comment. Is there any public comment? Hearing
I
none?
just like to say thank you for letting me speak this evening. And thank you for all your work on these updated regulations. We and myself especially very much appreciate the time that you spent on this. And we hope that we didn't cause too much pain for you guys sending them back with our updates.
Well, you're certainly welcome, and we appreciate your perspective walking through the conversation tonight as well.
Very much.
Good, you're very welcome.
Hearing nothing else, entertain a motion to adjourn. Can't believe there's not a.
Somebody.
It's going for the button.
Sure.
Slim.
I'll second it.
Bill seconds it.
There
All
you
those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Raise your hand.
Aye.
Anybody opposed or abstaining? Good. Thank you very much.
Good night, all.
All right,
Night.
night.
Drive safe.